So you can see how it works. And now here's a comparison tab where we see the forward link, where we do not update the index reference period, the backward link using 1 month as our index reference period. So for example, December 2018 or 19, I can't remember what the values are here, equals 100. And then the backward link with the annual average. And luckily, if we do this correctly, all the trends should be the same regardless of how we link this same data. So I've taken the same data source and I've just made different choices about how I'm going to link in the new series. In one case, I'm going to forward link. In one case, I'll backward link to using just 1 month as my reference period. And in the final case, I backward link using the entire annual average as my reference period. And because I'm using the same data here, I get the same trends regardless of the method. Okay, so if you're curious about this, you can look through this spreadsheet. You have this available, and it kind of walks through how that works. Okay, so now I'm going to, I guess I can pause here just to see if anybody has any questions, and then I'll move on to our summary of the course. Any questions? Also, feel free to ask any questions we didn't get to on the last few days.
Is there any question before we move to the brief summary?
May I?
Yes, please, Mas Fendi.
Thank you, Debbie. About yesterday, that about item weight. Your presentation is suggest that the item weight is the same period with index reference period. Just like we know, we use a given index is geometric mean. So when we have the item weight, but it's not the same with our index reference period, is that okay for our increase our quality?
That is a very interesting question. So you introduce item weights, and your question is, can you just keep the series continuous, or do you have to make a link when you make that change?
Just continue.
So you go from using geometric means to now taking the same items and now applying item weights to them.
Yeah.
You know, that's such an unusual case. Usually you'd have like a new sample that you'd introduce with item weights. And if you have a new sample, we do link, okay? Anytime you substantially update the sample of producers, you would do a link there. My guess, I need to think about it a little more, but I think if you're introducing item weights, you probably do want to make a link there. But if the sample's exactly the same, let me think about that a little bit more and get back to you. If you introduce item weights with a new sample of producers, then you're going to link in the new series. Okay, and again, you don't have to update the index reference period. So that could happen in a way that's, nothing looks different about the series. If you use a forward linking factor, there's no problem there. I believe, I mean, my instinct would be to go ahead and do a forward link if you were to introduce a new method like that. But I certainly would put out a notice on your website that explains how you've changed the methodology. I will continue to think about that a little more though, because it's an interesting case. I also want to point out here, actually, I think it'll come up later in my recommendations, but for CPI, the CPI manual I was reviewing today, and they strongly encourage always using an annual average as the index reference period. And that is the most common practice around the world. I think the PPI manual is not as definitive on that. The PPI manual kind of says either option is acceptable. So just as for curiosity or for anyone who's interested in that issue, for PPI, I think we have a little more flexibility that we can choose to use just 1 month as our reference period rather than an annual average. But there's no downside to using an annual average. It just means you need to calculate the data for a full year before you get that to link in. That also presents some practical decision points there. I think I see one other question in the chat. Does linking data method also apply in CPI and for the agricultural? So yes, these methods are the same regardless of the price index. So any price index uses this same method to combine the index series. And those choices that I talked about of either backward linking or forward linking can be used for any price index. As a matter of fact, a lot of the material that I use to make this lecture actually comes from the CPI manual. Okay, so maybe before I move on to the summary, there was one other question we had yesterday that I found extremely fascinating, and that was about the case of the bus company that has raised their prices because now each passenger has to purchase 2 tickets. I talked to a couple of colleagues. We were not able to really get a clear consensus. I think, again, as I mentioned, in my 20 years of experience compiling price indexes, I had never encountered a situation quite exactly like this one. So we are truly living in very interesting times. But I think for me, it still feels like a price increase rather than an increase in quality. Because yes, while they are in effect, purchasing 2 seats, they cannot spread out over those 2 seats, right? Because that would violate social distancing. And so first of all, they have no choice in the matter of purchasing this extra seat. They're really still purchasing basic transportation from the origin to the destination. And while it's true in a normal world where you can say now you get more space, you're getting a quality improvement, because they're restricted in how they can use this additional space, and they didn't really have a choice about it. I think if we think about the deflator properties of the price index here, if they are achieving the same revenue, they're getting the same nominal output while selling half the tickets, I think that makes more sense as a price increase than an increase in volume of bus transportation services. So that's my personal view, but I will just again say that it's such a unique situation that I don't think you can make a wrong decision. But if this is really a significant factor in determining what your level of your passenger transportation index would be, I think it would be a good practice to kind of, without disclosing any particular respondent, you could explain this issue generally and explain the method you've chosen to use, or at least inform your key data users about the issue. That maybe would involve a conversation with the national accounts, the people who work on transportation in the national accounts. So that's my take on that one. When we change reference period and also some new items are added in the new reference period to calculate the new index, can we link the old index with the new index? Yes. So again, there are 2 situations when you use these linking methods: when the weights change or when your sample of producers substantially changes. Okay, so usually for PPIs, when there's a weight update, most statistical offices will draw an entirely new set of producers. Now, in that entirely new set of producers, there will be a lot of overlap with the old sample, right? If you're dealing with an area like telecommunications, your very largest firms are going to be in every sample you'll ever draw, because they are so important. They're like what we call certainty selections. So I know in my experience, every time we drew a new sample, even if most of the companies were the same, we would link them, because without linking, you're going to have a problem. You don't want to directly compare your old producers to your new producers. Let me put it that way. And so linking helps you achieve that. Now, most of my experience was also done using long-term price relatives, which adds another level of complication and makes it more important that you link things in. With the short-term formula that you use and that most countries use, you're able to link in items individually without having to link the entire index. So if you just have a few producers coming in and out, by the fact that you use the short-term index, the short-term relative formula, you can do that without linking. So I think for you and your methods, I think you're basically going to use the linking method whenever you update the weights. That's my perception of when you would use the linking method. If there's a time where you completely change over the sample of producers and it's not timed with a weight update, then I would encourage you to also do a link then. But I believe that I think you mostly update your samples at the same time you update your weights, I think. So that would be the time to do this linking procedure. And again, you guys are using the backward link, which also is by far the most common method used around the world. So the backward link means that you are updating your index reference period. If you do a forward link, that means your index reference period stays the same. Okay, so I'll move on now to our short summary, and then we'll have another chance to get questions in when I finish with this summary. Okay, so just kind of reiterating some of the most important points that we covered with our lectures this week. So why is it important to do PPIs for services? Because services activities are a large share of the Indonesian economy, and they may even be growing as a share. And we expect they probably will continue to grow over the long term. Accurate deflation of services production in the national accounts is critically important. And while CPIs can be effective for certain activities, for other things like freight transportation and warehousing and professional services, a lot of the activities that you are planning to cover in the future, the CPI cannot serve as an adequate deflator for those activities. Okay, and we know from economic analysis and economic policy that productivity is hugely important in determining growth over the long term, and good PPIs for services will help us identify productivity within the services sector, which is the largest component of economy-wide productivity. So we have these 10 steps of PPI compilation. which follows from the PPI manual. And we can review that whenever we're thinking about creating new indexes for PPIs. We can follow these 10 steps. When you're choosing activities when you're making your strategy for expanding your PPI, you can consider these factors that we talked about. When we talk about weights, remember we talk about 3 different types of weights. Activity weights, which is at the ISIC 4-digit and above. And those are from either the national accounts or the economic census or the annual business survey. I say here fixed for 1 to 5 years. I think now you're doing it every 10 years. It would be great as a longer term improvement to be able to do it more frequently, but that would be a longer term improvement. Detailed product weights. Those are the weights for any elementary aggregates we choose to create that are more detailed than the ISIC 4-digit level. And those would ideally come from the same source as our activity weights or higher level index weights. And those would get updated with the same frequency as our activity weights. And lastly, item weights, which you may consider using in the future, are based on company sales that are collected directly from respondents. And if you're not able to collect sales directly, you might be able to estimate it based on any information you have about the employment of the unit. And of course, when we don't have item weights, we use the Jevons methods, which was those geometric means that we saw in our index calculation spreadsheets. As you expand your services coverage, one of the key questions you're going to ask for each new activity is what makes sense as my sample unit? Should I be sampling this at the establishment level? Or should I be looking at either the enterprise level or the kind of activity unit level? So the questions here are: sales and price data reportable by physical location? If yes, that makes establishment collection possible. Do price trends vary by physical location? Because if the prices are the same for all the locations of an enterprise, you could probably save some money by just going and collecting it once from the headquarters rather than going to all of the different locations across the country. And finally, is there significant secondary production? Because we know if there is significant secondary production, we may want to create kind of activity units so we can collect the specific activity only when we go to visit the company. And of course, if we do that, that means we might need to make separate collection visits when the same company is selected for different activities. So for your large airlines, you might have a piece of that company that you'll collect for passenger air transportation, and then maybe it's at the same time, or maybe it's at a different time. You create a separate kind of activity unit and then collect that for freight air transportation. I didn't give the lecture on researching services activities. I think you already have a lot of experience with this. But again, with this researching services activities, gather information about the products that are sold, the important price determining characteristics, the types of prices that companies are charging, and learn about who are the most significant companies so you can make sure that they are correctly represented in your sample frame. If they're not, sometimes, for an activity where things are changing very frequently, I've experienced cases where you see a large company is missing from your sampling frame, and you just go ahead and manually add them in because you know that they're offering, they have a large market share for the activity from your research. And, we've talked a lot this week about how we need to convince the companies to participate in our surveys. It's not always an easy thing to do. In my experience, the more that you can show that you've designed the collection materials based on good research, where the services that the companies are offering, and basically how they're priced, any industry lingo that they're using, and you reflect that in your questionnaire, and you try to align the data collection so it fits with the records they already keep to the greatest extent possible. Okay, then we've talked about the pricing methods that we can use: direct pricing of repeated services, unit value pricing, model pricing only when we have to, which is when the same services are not offered under the same terms and conditions in repeated periods, and list prices, which are usually a fallback method when we're not able to collect any of the other types of prices. You can remember this very confusing chart that I gave you earlier this week, which is really just to help you think about the different factors that may lead you to decide to collect unit values or not. And again, remember this key point about if the services are not offered under similar terms and conditions in repeated periods, the model pricing is our likely best and only option. We talked a bit about data collection, and it's strongly recommended that respondent initiation for services PPIs be executed by data collectors who have been trained on the procedures for that specific activity. And again, if you're dealing with something like telecommunications, where there's only a few companies to collect, we want our data collectors, the people who will go in and make those visits, to have done some research about telecommunications, whether that's coming from the headquarters staff training those collectors, but they want to go into that visit with some familiarity about the types of services that are offered and what the strategy for collecting the prices is, and how they can execute that. Later on, as you move into different stages of development of PPIs for services, you might get to things like financial services, which are very unique, and where you need to be thinking about different factors when you go and visit those companies and collect data. Again, in the United States, what I found is that the more we had a data collector or a headquarters staff who might even have accompanied a data collector on a visit, that kind of already knew the language of the industry, the better chance we had of collecting data. Because these companies are very busy, they don't want to kind of have to feel that they first have to explain how their industry works before we go to collect the data. So in my experience, that proved important. And again, in-person is great, but I think we're all learning during COVID, video conferencing or telephone, they're also great. So I would not hesitate to use those technologies if the company agrees. And again, if we move in the direction of using item weights during that initiation visit, we're going to have to collect that weighting information, select items. And again, usually for item selection, you can just choose the most important items within the different categories you're collecting. We need to specify the items for constant quality pricing. So, we talked about for professional services, we need to know something about who the buyer is, what kind of professionals are involved in providing the service, how many hours they are spending on providing the service. There's quite a bit of information we might need to collect to specify the transaction properly. Again, in my experience, sometimes the more effort we put into that initiation visit, the easier it was for us to get accurate prices in all the future months. The initiation visits were really hard, but if we could do them really well, data collection would become easier for each month in the future. All right, we also need to collect our initial item prices, and we want to instruct our respondents on the procedures for completing future price updates. So if they're going to get a call from an enumerator every month, we want to explain that process to them so it's predictable for them. And ideally, if there's anything that can be customized based on their preference, that we communicate that to them as well. Remember, the easier it is for the business to complete the survey, the more likely it is they'll do it. And finally, for all these things, I really would encourage you, just like I encourage all the countries I work with, to focus on progress, not perfection. It's never perfect right away. Truthfully, it's never perfect even after you do it for many years. It's not an easy thing to do, to collect PPIs for services. So particularly as you're starting, don't worry if things aren't perfect, right? The answer to imperfections is to try to improve them over time. And I can tell you, I think that's what every single country that's compiled PPIs for services went through this experience of, trying to get something started. And then when you find things that could be done better, let's make the improvements over time. Okay. So I'll stop it there. And I think this is also when you guys are going to get to take your post quiz. But before we do that, if there are any questions about any of the materials we talked about or anything we didn't cover this week.
Mbak Deb.
Ya, silakan Cindy.
Thank you. Andrew, I would like to ask about the, what is it? About majority of services users that you mentioned earlier about when we should use, when we could use household data instead of all data. So is there to know whether we could use household data only is to make sure that the proportion of customers from that activity is measured by household. And as you mentioned earlier, that in order to know this, we could see the data from national account or maybe the other sources. And what if this data is not available? Could we use, for example, data from one or two major companies? So we ask the proportion of the output or sales for household and business customer. And if we already have that information, is there any threshold as the basis for us to decide whether we could use the household data only? That is the first question.
Okay, maybe I'll take that question and then we can go to the second one.
Okay.
So normally the way that I've seen this process works is that you make that determination not for a specific company, but for an entire activity. So you don't first go ask them about their sales by buyer type and then figure out if you can just use some other data source. In my experience, you would make a decision for an entire activity. So I mentioned before that there are countries where, things like the subway or commuter bus service or commuter train service, that they don't collect that in the PPI because they think the results from the CPI should be exactly the same, right? Because basically it's all bought by households, and even if businesses do buy some of it, they're paying the same prices as the households. I think restaurants is another good example of that, where yes, businesses might pay for meals at restaurants, but they're usually paying the same prices as households. So you may choose to just use the CPI for those activities. And in the lecture where we talked about picking activities to cover, generally I encourage countries to look first at the activities that are not adequately covered by the CPI. So like I said, I think activities like entertainment or recreation activities, those are usually adequately covered by the CPI. So there's no need to really collect a separate PPI for them. But I would make that decision at the activity level as opposed to at the individual company level. Because if you've already gone out and started visiting the companies, I think usually at that point we can collect the prices at that point. Because even if one business sells mostly to domestic households, other businesses within that activity may not, and we want to reflect all that data together in the PPI. Remember, the PPI reflects sales to everybody, basically.
For example, the telecommunication sector. So we know that we have 3 major companies there in Indonesia, and if we maybe we could get some information about their customer share. So if we know about their output for household and businesses, maybe we could use like the data from website to know the household, to just get the information about the household price only, something like that.
Yes, so there what you could do is say, for the company, you find out how much of their sales are to households and then how much are to non-households. And for the household part, and again, this is where item weights help, because item weights, you can say, I'll take this much of their revenue and create a separate detailed product aggregation that's just for consumer sales, right? If you can find out within wired telecommunications, this percentage of production revenue comes from sales to households, and this percentage comes from sales to businesses, then you could use CPI quotes in your detailed product index for the consumer portion of the market. And then when you go visit the companies, you can only collect the business part. I hope that's clear. But again, I think that's where detailed product categories would help you. I've seen cases even where they just use the CPI for the whole detailed category of consumer sales, and then your total PPI for telecommunications would be calculated as a weighted average of the CPI prices for the consumer part and your directly collected prices for the business part. So yes, that is an acceptable method. I would just point out though, again, with telecommunications, you have to be aware of when taxes change. If it's value-added tax, that should be pretty straightforward because you generally know when it changes. But if there are other kinds of taxes and fees that get added into the price, they will affect the CPI, but you do not want them to affect the PPI.
Okay, thank you. As for the second question is about the unit value, the pricing methods. In the meantime, we are using direct of repeated price, in almost the activities that we have. If we would like to change the pricing methods on the same activities, but on some of the samples only, using the unit value, for example, and the price possibly will vary more fluctuated. How could we handle these things? Should we, because we couldn't revise our previous indexes, so we just can make, should we make like some adjustment for the index for the future. Some fluctuated direction is less favorable things here. So it would be more challenges for us if the price movement is very fluctuated, because in my opinion, using unit value will make our index move very fluctuated. Okay, thank you.
So yes, those are the great questions. I do have experience with this issue. So I mentioned that in the US, we were using direct prices of repeated services for passenger airlines in the PPI. And then, you know, we did research and we found that like our data was not matching what any other sources about airline fares were showing. Our data was very flat, so no one called and said, why is this moving so much? But, you know, we could get calls saying, why is it not showing the same trend as everybody else is showing, which is also a major problem. So when we introduced the new method, we started seeing more volatility in the measures. I think we tracked it for a little bit before we substituted to those prices. But we did put out a notice explaining the issue. And we even were very transparent and said, look, we were using this method. The prices were very flat, and these other people were measuring prices and showing a different results. We think there was some issues with the way we were pricing it. And so now this is the step we're taking to better reflect what's really happening in the market. So again, it's disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. Again, you want to talk to your national accounts about those kinds of changes before you put them in to make sure everyone's comfortable with it. Volatility is definitely a tricky thing with unit values. There's some volatility which is good and okay because it's showing real things that are happening, but excess volatility could be a sign that you don't really have a homogeneous group of services within your calculated unit values. So like I mentioned, if you just take the average of all flights, regardless of origin and destination, yes, I'm sure you're going to get a very volatile unit value, and it's not going to be a good price. It's going to violate the concepts of constant quality that we need to measure to make sure we get an accurate price index. So like I said, I think it can provide value in really showing the price trends that are actually happening in the market, and also allowing you to be more efficient in your data collection because it could reduce the number of price quotations you need to collect. And it lets you indirectly increase your sample size by, which is really a tremendous value, I think, increasing the number of transactions you're reflecting in the index. But I would monitor the data first before you go in and make a change like that. And I would provide notice to your key data users, and then once you've decided to move forward. So like before you make the change, I would talk to the national accounts and maybe kind of show them a little bit of what the data might look like. And then before you introduce the change with the public data, maybe put out a short notice that just explains the issue and why you're choosing to make that change, if you do choose to. And again, if direct pricing is getting what you think is, again, we would only make that change if we thought there was a reason to. And for us, in our experience, we found there were a lot of indexes that we didn't think were that great. We didn't think they were doing their job properly. And we did that by looking at a lot of data sources. I used to always tell my staff to if the CPI for an activity is moving one way and the PPI isn't, and we think they should generally be following the same trend, let's look into why and let's see what we should do about it. So again, I think it comes out of those kinds of research and analyses. If there's some other data source that you know, maybe the airline association, or, you know, there's a lot of private parties that put out data on things like airfares. And maybe if you're seeing your data is not quite lining up with what you'd expect, that might be a reason to pursue alternatives. But if you feel like your data, you know, there is no issue, then stay with direct pricing, you know, because it's working. If it's working, stay with it.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Andrew.
I see a question in the chat here. Linking series with the backward link. There is different change if we use annual average. There shouldn't be. Now, in the slides, the original slides which you've seen, if you, depending on how you do it, if you do the annual average where you wait a year of the calculated data before calculating the annual average, it can give you slightly different values for the annual changes, but which is reflected in the original slides that I posted on your site, and that is also mentioned in the CPI manual. But we found that countries don't really do that. They don't really wait a year and calculate the index before introducing it with a calculated annual average. What they'll do is they'll just set the previous year to 100 and link in immediately with the new values. So what I would encourage you to do is read the chapter that talks about this topic in the new CPI manual. I know Paul Armnecht was involved with writing it, and I know that he also worked with you guys in Indonesia some years ago. A truly great prices expert. So he lays out some very good explanations in the CPI manual that talks about linking. Ideally, we really shouldn't see trends differences if we, regardless of the method we choose. Any other questions?
Any other question before we have a post test? I think there is no question anymore. Maybe we can start our post test. But please don't leave this meeting, because after the post test we will have another agenda and learning session with Andrew again. And Andrew, you also stay here. Don't go anywhere.
So we'll start again at about, what, 9:55? No, I'm using Washington time. At about 9 a.m. or?
About 8:50 maybe.
8:50. Okay. I'm going to turn off my video, but I'll be back at 8:50.
Okay, see you.
All right.
Baik Bapak Ibu, post testnya bisa dimulai, tapi nggak usah ninggalin Zoom meeting yang ini ya, karena ini akan dipakai sampai nanti closing remark. Ya, silakan. Post test bisa dimulai dari sekarang. Mulai.
Mbak, pas-pasnya kok nggak bisa dibuka, Mbak Debbie?
Sudah bisa, Bu. Coba di refresh, Bu.
Oh iya, iya, iya.
Kok pada serius banget?
Mbak Debbie.
Ya Bu Indri.
Yang PR-nya kemarin apa namanya? Sir Andrew udah jawab belum? Yang masalah.
Udah tadi.
Oh, udah ya. Aku kelewatan ya.
Kayaknya tadi awal-awal udah Bu.
Iya.
Apa maksudnya gimana Bu?
Yang Excel kemarin tuh loh, Dep. Andrew udah ngasih jawabannya belum?
Udah dikasih ke Cepi, udah dikirim, dan kemarin tuh kalau nggak salah lagi diperiksa sama Cepi sebagai penilaian kita juga.
Oh, kayaknya gue salah semua deh.
Bukan ya. Bukan yang
bukan
itu, ya? yang kemarin kita nanya tentang transportasi itu loh sama Sir Andrew.
Oh, bukan yang Excel ya, Bu?
Bukan. Kemarin kan ada yang nanya tuh terakhir, Mas Fendi kalau nggak salah. Tanya tentang apa namanya, transportasi yang tempat duduknya kosong.
Oh iya, tadi kan udah dijawab sama Andrew.
Di awal-awal ya.
Yang
aku belum gabung
dia
lagi.
bilang menurut dia udah nanya sama temennya juga, tapi nggak ada pengalaman yang seperti kita. Tapi menurut dia itu terjadi kenaikan harga, bukan perbedaan kualitas. Kenapa?
Oh, jadi dianggap naik ya? Dianggap naik, walaupun dia bayarnya
iya.
tetap. Oke.
Pokoknya kalau kata Mas Fendi, daerah tuh pokoknya cacah aja apa adanya, nanti biar adjustment-nya bagaimana itu pusat yang menentukan.
Gue pengen nanya ke Andrew sih, Dep, tapi nggak jadi deh.
Ya, tinggal nanya aja, tak?
Udah kelar juga.
Enggak, habis ini masih dibuka sesi diskusi dulu sebelum dia ngasih rekomendasi.
Oh, ya udah ntar aja. Kalau jadi nanya. Jadi udah jam 11, soalnya sekali lagi gue kan harus Jumatan.
Ya iya, makanya lu nanya pertama.
Enggak sih, cuma pengen tahu pengalamannya dia itu sektor mana yang paling berat ketika ngitung PPIs sih.
Ya udah, nanti ditanyain aja, nggak apa-apa, sebagai apa sih namanya, experience.
Nggak penting juga sih.
Nggak penting.
Ya, penting.
Penting tuh.
Nggak apa-apa. Ya kan sharing pengalaman tuh, Bu.
Nggak apa-apa, karena kita kan masih punya waktu sampai jam 10.15.
Oh. Ini ada lulus nggak lulusnya ya, Dep?
Enggak kok. Lulus semua.
Indonesia.
Kalau post testing soalnya sama, cuma pilihan ganda diubah mau. Iya Pak, betul.
Lupa mulu gitu.
Ya, Bapak Ibu sudah kembali lagi belum ya? Aduh, feedback nih. Tes. Nah, Bapak Ibu sudah bergabung lagi. Halo Bapak Ibu, sudah selesai, bisa kita mulai lagi?
Bisa.
Hi Andrew, we already finished the cost test.
Great. You know, there are a couple things I was wondering if you can help me with. I know you will do like a post-course evaluation with all the participants. If you would be willing to share any of that information with me, the results of the post-course.
Oh yeah, maybe Cepi will share the result of the pre-test and post-test to you.
Sure,
Because,
and then also the like course of, not the test. I mean, I'm interested in the test results, but also just how the evaluation of the course.
Oh yeah, maybe later Cepi will send the evaluation of this course to you.
Yes, the results of everybody's evaluations. I mean,
Yes.
you know, or just a summary.
Oke. Cepi sudah bergabung belum ya? Maybe we can continue the agenda.
Yeah.
So we will have another discussion, or you will give some recommendation.
Yes, I have a presentation with some preliminary recommendations, which I will go through. Again, I want to just stress that this is just some preliminary thoughts, and I want to talk with the compilers to make sure that it's something everybody is comfortable with. So I don't know, maybe we can have another small group discussion at some point in the future. But I'll probably submit a draft written report within about 2 weeks. But even before then, I'm happy to have a discussion so I can make sure that the recommendations are tailored to what you're thinking about doing. One other question I had is, will this course site, will that stay up for a little bit? Will I still be able to access that next week?
I don't know, maybe I will confirm to the Cepi or another else in Pusdiklat, because they have this warkop.
Right. Okay, it's good. It's just helpful for me to get some of the information about the course. So, but no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to share a presentation about some of the recommendations that I've mentioned. So just first starting with some general observations. As we've talked about, looking at the website, looking at the data that exists, BPS produces high quality SPPIs, and your strategy to further expand coverage is excellent. We talked a bit this week about the factors that we want to think about when we're choosing the activities to cover, and the ones you've chosen align perfectly with the factors that we discussed. So that includes the telecom, which you're working on now, the freight transportation, and then in the future, warehousing and storage services, support services for transportation, and into the future, professional services, and so on. So in talking with you this week, it seems that the key steps to continue the progress is to see what we can do to get the telecommunications and freight transportation data published as soon as we can. And then make additional efforts to obtain cooperation from some of our largest companies, which again, I think is a very typical challenge that many countries have when they start working with PPIs for services. So my first recommendation will be that I think you should consider publishing the new indexes with recent index reference periods. Again, I think it's not the best choice to wait until the every 10-year updating of the weights to introduce these new data series. By introducing new indexes with a more recent index reference period, new data can be shared with users as soon as it is deemed suitable for publication. And if we use this new approach, it sounds like you can start disseminating the freight transportation data very soon. Okay, and this issue of having different index reference periods is not a permanent condition, because when we reach the point of the next weight update, if you choose to use the backward linking option, then your index reference periods will return to alignment. So I gave here an example working from the data on your website. Let's say we added a new index for freight transport that you've been calculating back to 2016 equals 100. So there's a couple different ways we could do that. We could include the data on the same table that you currently release just by adding a column indicating the index reference period so that users could quickly see that this series has a different index reference period than the others. That's one option. Another option could be to just simply publish it as a separate table. So you have one table with all your indexes 2010 equals 100, then you'd introduce a new one that is 2016 equals 100 just for freight transport. And then again, that would only be temporary until you align the weights and the index reference period. Then this data can be added to the other table, to the main table. So I think those are two different options that are both acceptable and would be ways that you could start sharing this freight transport data. So some questions to consider. What is a realistic target for when we can start publishing the freight transportation SPPIs, right? If you choose to either, if you're comfortable with this recommendation, and you could either publish it as a separate table or as part of the main table with some modifications to the table, how long would that take to put that in place? So that's something I'm interested in talking with you further about, so that I could make a recommendation in the report that aligns with your discussions about what you think would, first of all, whether you think this recommendation is appropriate and whether you would be able to do it. And then if so, when would be a realistic date by which it could be done by. And as I mentioned, in the future, you could consider using a single month as the index reference period rather than an annual average. But again, I wouldn't, I think you have a system. I think it's totally acceptable the way you do it now. So I think the best improvement will just be allowing for these varying index reference periods. Okay, so my second recommendation, again, that we've talked about this week, is that I think we should make additional efforts to obtain response from the largest companies. And particularly for some of these indexes that you've been working on recently, we know the quality of the telecommunications and air freight transportation indexes will be heavily affected by the cooperation of the largest companies. So some options to consider. You know, when I've had this experience of large companies, maybe who did the initiation visit, but then did not complete the subsequent price updates, I would send official documentation to the senior company officials, alerting them to the non-response, because sometimes they don't even know that the company is not responding. You know, we think that maybe they have all these objections, but in some cases they just don't know. And so it's just a matter of reaching out to a senior finance official at the company and explaining what we're trying to do here. And then they might take that extra step of assigning a staff member to do it. So, you know, I'm not sure if that will be the case in your situation, but I've certainly seen that situation before. And it's just a matter of finding the right person in the company who has the ability and the willingness to make this reporting happen. Another option we can consider is involve the government liaisons to the industry. I know you've talked about meeting with the telecom ministry, particularly in the situation you're finding yourselves in where these are almost semi-public, semi-private institutions. There probably are some people in the government who are involved with liaison activities to these companies. And if we could identify those people, maybe they would help us in building the relationships with the right contacts at these companies and trying to find a solution that will allow them to move forward with responding. And then finally, we want to identify the company concerns, right? So I mentioned we don't necessarily know if they even have concerns. They might just, it's a big company, they're very busy, maybe it just kind of got lost and they just need to be alerted to it. On the other hand, we may find that, you know, we reach out to a senior official and they say, well, you know, we don't share this data, so I've told my staff not to do it and we don't want to participate. Well, then we should try to identify their specific concerns and try to address them. So if they're concerned about confidentiality, I would prepare a short summary of the steps you take to safeguard their data. I don't know the situation in Indonesia, but if the statistics law prohibits sharing of prices outside of BPS, that would be a good thing to talk about. In the documentation we use to convince companies to participate with us, we often would cite very specific legal language. And the reason for that is we found at some of these big companies, their legal departments would create an impediment to reporting. So if you find that their legal departments are involved in this process, then you want to try to create some language that makes sense to the lawyers. And that usually will mean citing specific laws. Again, not that necessarily mandate their participation, but that explain how the law takes seriously the responsibility to make sure that the data is protected. Okay, again, if their concerns are that it's just a burdensome request, Maybe we could try to offer some flexibilities in their response mode. And again, this will depend on the rules for BPS. But could we do email? If email is not considered secure enough, can you use any kind of secure messaging software? I know that there's some options out there of encrypted software that lets users post data on a website that's behind a firewall. Things like a Dropbox or those kinds of applications. I'm just really brainstorming some ideas, but I think when you're having this challenge with not getting cooperation from the large companies, I'd encourage you to be flexible and try to be creative in finding a solution that might facilitate reporting. And then, maybe some flexibility in the types of prices to collect, right? So if they say, well, it's hard with our accounting system or our records to get the prices to you this way, but it's easier for us to do it that way, then consider it. Any reporting, as long as it doesn't violate fixed quality procedures, it doesn't violate the basic assumptions of a price index, then there should be some flexibility afforded. And as I mentioned, it might make sense to possibly include senior BPS management in these communications to demonstrate the importance of the issue. But again, that's based on your individual circumstances. So I would just recommend that you consider it, not necessarily that it's an official recommendation. And then my third recommendation is also something we've talked about this week, and I've kind of gone back and forth in my mind a little bit about it, but I do think it makes sense at some point in the future to introduce mean imputation of missing prices to the elementary aggregates. And right now you're using the omission method, and I think there are really two advantages of moving to the imputation method. The first is when the product becomes temporarily unavailable because it's not produced in a given period. If you find the situation, if you use imputation, then you can bring the item back into the index as soon as it re-enters the market. If you omit the item, you probably need to wait 2 periods. And I'll show that in the next slide here. But this situation of products or services being temporarily unavailable is happening a lot with COVID. And we are certainly hearing about these cases from many statistical offices around the world that we work with. And then the second case is if the product becomes permanently unavailable. So that's like the quality adjustment cases that we talked about yesterday. Mean imputation allows you to substitute in the new product with a price relative based on the price changes for similar items. And we need to do this when there's no overlap period, when the old permanently unavailable item and the new item are available for sale in the same period. If you bring new products into the index with a price relative of 1 in these cases, you will create a bias towards 0 change in your index. And for activities with frequent product substitutions, this bias can be very significant. And I've seen many studies that have talked about, again, particularly high-tech activities, but I think apparel was mentioned earlier this week. There are other places where there are frequent product substitutions, and if you repeatedly bring in these new items with a price relative of 1 in their first month they're included, the bias can really be significant. And it's a bias towards 0 change. Okay, so first on the case of the temporarily missing items. Here I'm going to show you 3 items in an elementary aggregate, and then I have 4 months as my columns. And you can see here I have short-term price relatives. So in month 1, item 1 has a current price of 5 and a previous price of 5, creating a price relative of 1. Then in month 2, the item has a price of 6. So the price relative is current period price divided by prior period price, or 6 divided by 5, 1.2 price relative. So let's say we have for item 3, in the third month, the item is not sold because the business is temporarily closed due to COVID. And then in month 4, they open up again. So they tell us that the price of this item is now 6. It is not acceptable to compare the price of 6 to the 5.5 price in the month 2, because you use short-term relatives. If you use that method, I hope that's clear. I'm talking about in this situation where there is no price in month 3, it is not a good solution to just assume that the price in month 3 was the same as the price in month 2. That will create a downward bias in your index, because you're not necessarily a downward bias. Let me correct that. It creates a bias towards zero change. Because we don't know really anything about what happened with this item in period 3. We know that it wasn't sold. So to say that we know that there was no price change for the item is actually not correct. What actually happened is that the item did not exist in the market. So we want to calculate our index using only item 1 and 2. And the only way to do that, I believe, is to temporarily impute a price for this item in month 3. Because otherwise, our only choices are comparing directly to month 2, which is not a good solution because it creates bias in the index, or wait till month 5, when we have both a current reported price and a previous reported price. And in a situation where in COVID and crises like this, where reporting is already very limited, we want to get in as many items into the index as we can. So simply imputing the price in month 3 will let us reintroduce the item in the 4th month immediately. And then the case of permanently missing items. So we talked about this yesterday, where here we have 3 items, and then the item number 3 becomes discontinued in month 4 here. And the new item 3 was not sold in the market in month 3. Okay, so that if the new item 3 was offered in the market in month 3, we could use the overlap method and link in the price relative for item 3, showing the change for the new item 3 in month 3 to month 4. But in this case, which will happen a lot, the item either was not available in item 3, or the company did not provide you the information on what they sold it for in item 3. I've seen both cases happen. So again, imputing a price for the prior period allows you to use the new item in its first month, because you'll assume a price in the prior period that is that basically gives you a change in your first month equal to the mean of your other items in month 4. So look here in this example here, we have item 1 has a price relative of 1.4. Item 2 has a price relative of 1.43. So there's a lot going on in this market this month. It's not a good practice to introduce this new item with a price relative of 1.0, because now you've fundamentally changed the index. You're making it be closer to no change. What we want to do is assume that this item that comes into the index in month 4, in the first month, we're going to say that its price increased by somewhere between 40 and 43%, because that's the average of what happened with the other items. And that is the recommended method in the manuals. Okay, so that's just something I think you should consider in the future. And I'm interested to get your thoughts about that. And I know that that could be problematic because it involves changing your calculation routines. And so, I know that maybe you have to find the right time when you're able to do that. It's not the kind of thing you can just do quickly. But I do think that would be a longer term improvement for your PPIs. And then finally, just some additional recommendations to consider. I think these are nice to haves, which you might consider in the future. We've talked about introducing item weights based on company sales in the initiation period. I think this is particularly important for certain activities where the prices for big companies very possibly will move differently than the prices for small companies. And we also talked about introducing detailed product weights. I'm not sure if you have some detailed categories within the ISEC 4 digits that might improve the accuracy of your 4-digit indexes, even if you don't publish the detail. Okay, so normally, if you decide, like, again, we can go back to the example we had yesterday. If you're introducing an index for freight transport by road, freight transport, Indonesia is an island country, so I'm not sure if you can do international transactions by road. I know in certain parts of the country you can. But let's say you have freight air and your international prices move really differently than your domestic prices. Again, exchange rates can be a factor in those kinds of trends. You might say, look, I don't have enough data to really produce reliable, detailed indexes on international freight transportation by air versus domestic freight transportation by air, but I can still create detailed elementary aggregates without publishing them, just to kind of improve the accuracy of the higher level index. And that also kind of goes along with the previous recommendation of using mean imputation, because if you make your elementary aggregates more homogeneous, you improve the accuracy of the imputation that occurs. And the last thing that I might choose to highlight is, as you're adding new activities, seeing if there are creative ways we could use to train our field enumerators on the procedures for each of these new activities. And sometimes I think this can be done with video sessions, just like the one we're doing now, where the headquarters staff who've been involved in doing the research for the early study of the activity and have maybe been talking to companies or talking to industry experts, they can then provide some training to the field enumerators that will go visit the companies. And again, I think you might already do some of this, but the more you could do might be advantageous. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If there's anything, if you have any reactions to this set of recommendations, anything that I didn't cover that you think would be appropriate, or anything I covered that maybe I didn't get the full situation. I didn't have a full understanding of your compilation at BPS. I'd be curious for all the feedback, good or bad.
Thank you, Andrew, for the recommendation. So is there any comment for the recommendation, or maybe first Bu Sri, do you have any comment? Nggak ada. Atau Bapak Ibu di daerah dari rekomendasi-rekomendasi yang tadi dipaparkan Andrew, bagaimana komennya, atau mau sharing lagi pengalaman di daerahnya seperti apa biar Andrew lebih mengerti gimana kondisi di lapangan gitu. Silakan. Mas Fendi mau komen? Oke, mungkin Mas Fendi mau komen. Please, Mas Fendi.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Especially is very thankful. Thank you for you, Andrew, for this whole weeks that your lecture to sharing to discuss with us. It's very useful information, useful discussion to increase our PPI and to expand our SPPI especially, and for your recommendation we'll discuss in our PPI team, and then we discuss in higher level in BPS, and I hope we still can touch you maybe personally by email or any WhatsApp, I think. And I hope your after this pandemic, your first agenda to abroad is to visit Jakarta. Yeah, it's priceless for your sharing knowledge. So it's very useful to us.
Well, you can invite me.
I would love to visit. I hope someday that becomes possible again. I think something we may want to consider, maybe just with like your PPI team, the smaller team that will review this, maybe give you some time to look it over, think about it, and maybe if you want to, maybe we touch base in the next week or two before I start writing the report. But even if I start writing the report, it could still be changed. It takes a while to have those things work their way up through all the levels of approval within IMF. So we have plenty of time before anything gets set in stone. But I think it would be nice if we had another video chat, maybe with the smaller team, maybe to work through some of these details, because one of the things that we normally would put in these reports as well would be dates, and they're not, it's not like it's just to help like come up with a plan of dates. It's not something that we follow up and say, did it happen? Did it happen? It's just to kind of help you kind of plan out the future. I think the activities that you laid out earlier this week and what you're looking to cover in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that was really great. I think that's very much like exactly what I would recommend. So I think you're on the right track there. But again, the biggest question for me right now is, would you consider introducing these indexes with the different index reference period, either as part of that table or separate? And if so, when would be a realistic time to do that? So I know that that's something you have to discuss amongst your team and amongst management. But as soon as you have any additional information on that, that might be good for us to touch base.
Yeah. I think we'll discuss about new index reference periods. I think I hope for the third quarter we can. Oh, maybe Bu Sri, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, thank you, Fendi. Pak Andrew. Actually, yesterday I already talked to Pak Hasan as director that maybe we will consider changing the base year, that we realized that actually 2018 already have a complete data. So we will look through this 2018 data, whether all the information quite good. So we can use this year as a base for the next SPPI. But still that we are really consider this very carefully before we come up to our top management. And the second one, maybe about regarding your comment about this pandemic COVID-19 situation, that when your colleague said that when the price of the ticket considered as an increased price, that actually in terms of revenue, the company didn't really get an increase, right? Because the seat they sell actually only half, maybe a maximum. So actually the revenue may be the same with the previous month. So based on this information, can we still consider this as the price is increasing?
So we normally think of revenue equals price times quantity. And if we define the quantity as the number of tickets they sell, their revenue stays the same, their quantity decreases, which means their price must increase. But I will continue consulting with my colleagues and see if maybe I'll send a written update on this issue to see if there's a final answer, let's say. But in my view, I think if you think about from the deflator perspective, their quantity of sales should go down, right? Because they're transporting less people. I think, again, involving the national accounts in the discussion is very important to see what they consider as the true volume indicator here. But from my limited understanding, I feel like it should be a price increase.
Yeah, because this has happened.
Truthfully, I'm surprised that they can pass on such a large price increase, but it's a very interesting situation.
Yeah, actually in our CPI, this kind of happened when we released the information about this increasing price in transportation, I mean in passenger transportation. But I think that my colleagues in CPI calculation considered the weighting for the number of the ticket they sell, only put it as a lower weight. I mean less than previous weight for this sector. We really carefully explain about this situation. I think that our user maybe understand the situation, so no many questions. But next month, I don't know, maybe start many questions regarding this PPI and CPI situation, because still continue, right? The price still quite high for in terms of the number of the seats that quite less.
Yes, so I really want to. I didn't have a chance to talk too much with my colleagues today because we were all doing other things. But like I said, I think this is such an interesting issue that I'm going to talk with some colleagues, maybe also some managers, and I will send a written response on that by next week, because I understand how it's very unique and how it could be important. Just one thing about changing weights, though, one of the key things is that, with all of our CPI or PPI, these are fixed weight indexes. So, as we see around the world, things happen like, much less people are eating in restaurants than they did a few months ago. If we use the fixed weight concept, we don't necessarily keep adjusting the weights right away, particularly not in the PPI. clearly any changes we would make to weighting in this very unusual time would need to be clearly explained to users, and particularly if it goes against the normal methodology, which is to keep the weights fixed for some period of time.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Maybe I just wanna ask a really thank you for you because you already give this course to us. It makes us more understand about the SPPI, how to calculate, how to doing some mean imputation and so on. But I wanna make a confirmation about the small group discussion with the PPI team. When when it when we can discuss.
I would, really leave that up to you. Whenever you feel like that maybe I could provide a short written write-up of the slides I just presented, and maybe that gives you something you can react to. But it's really it's up to you. Whenever I'm saying I think it might be helpful, but it's totally your choice. And you would just let me know. I would, again, it'd have to be in the morning Jakarta time. But I'm generally flexible, and I'm sure with some advance notice we can schedule a day that works for everyone.
Yeah, okay, maybe we will discuss first about when we will have a discussion, more detailed discussion with you, and after that we will let you know about that. And also there is information from Chepi. All the evaluation of this course will be sent to you by email as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's good, because when we do these kinds of trainings and webinars, our managers like to see, like, not so much really because this remote training is a new thing for everyone. So
Yes.
It's not specific to this course or to me or to, it's really just about learning about the general comments people have about doing this remote training where we are 11 hours apart and many, many, many kilometers apart. But it's really been a great experience for me. So I've been telling.
And it's amazing because maybe it is our first time too to conduct the online training like this. So maybe
I see there are some questions in the chat. I'd be happy to kind of go through those if you think that's okay.
Okay, please.
All right. So first question here, it says, as data provider, withhold with the international manual to make data release. Usually we have to deal with negative comments to our data. I was wondering, so that's an interesting point, right? That is very normal for all the countries in the world. We provide this advice, and it's always about how you can make it better. I think this is a very accurate assessment of what the international organizations like the IMF do. We say, how can you make it better? How can you make it better? But by the way, that's also true in the most advanced statistical systems. We're always thinking about, what could be better? And there's always plenty of things that we find that can be improved with every country. But yeah, so the question was maybe looking from the other direction, rather than always finding how you can make it better, acknowledging how good it already is. And I would say the main way that we do that at the IMF is the dissemination standards, which really covers a lot of aspects of quality. when you joined the special dissemination standard, that meant that your price indexes were covering a certain number of activities. You were releasing them on a timely basis. You had controls in place that guaranteed the integrity of the data. So many of the countries that we work with, sometimes when I'm providing advice about PPI, I'm trying to give them advice so that they can qualify for the special data dissemination standard. So you guys are already ahead of that curve compared to many of the countries that I tend to work with. So in that sense, I would say you already have the certificate that says you guys are leaders in statistical compilation. And you've already achieved the outcome that much of our technical assistance is geared towards assisting countries to reach. But on the other hand, you know, we are interested in working with countries maybe that have reached the special data dissemination standard, but the standard doesn't really talk about services PPIs, which I think that's a function of when they made those standards. If we were making them today, I would try to convince people that we should include services PPIs in there. Because, you know, I think that's like the next step for PPIs, which you guys certainly recognize because you're doing it, and that we're encouraging other countries around the world to do. I know, you know, for some of you, Ms. Chindi and Ms. Siddhi, when we were in Bangkok talking with all the countries in the region, I think, I can't remember, but I think basically none of them really produced PPIs. Maybe one, India does some, but most of them don't do any, right? So Vietnam does. I worked with Vietnam and they have some PPIs for services. So, you know, we're trying to encourage everyone to expand coverage and to do more of them. And for Indonesia, you're on the right track. It's just a matter of how can we help you to get there faster? That's why I'm trying to say, like, can we introduce the indexes you're already compiling so we can show everybody about the great progress you've already made? And how can we make sure that those telecommunications indexes are as good as we can possibly make them? And again, how could we support you in your already very smart strategy of going to warehousing and transportation support activities? So it's a little bit different, I think, in your case than for other countries. Maybe, you know, when I started working with Georgia, you know, you mentioned that report. They had a few that they were thinking about, but they needed a lot more guidance on which activities should they go to next. So that's a long answer that doesn't really answer the question, but I would say you already have the certificate as being one of the leading statistical offices in the world. And we hope to continue to work with you to make it even better. Okay. I think that reaches the end of the questions in the chat. But I'd be happy to take any other questions we have, or even if there were any topics that we didn't get to. I've tried to leave a little extra time here, that if there was something we didn't cover that you have questions about, I could try to answer them, or if they're really tough questions, I will again try to talk to some of my colleagues, do some research and get an answer to you later.
Iya, silakan Bapak Ibu, masih ada yang ingin bertanya atau sekedar menyampaikan pendapat tentang training ini kepada Andrew? Dipersilakan Bu Indri.
I'm sorry, Andrew. Yes.
Oh ya, Tri.
I'm sorry for out of the topic that I was asked before. That I mean the comment is not from IMF. Maybe the negative comment is from the economists who don't satisfy about our data. Right? For example, in economic growth rates, as a national account is released about the national economic growth rate, we usually have deal with the other negative comment to maybe not satisfying them. Maybe my thing, I think that this certificate is a weapon for us to just make sure that we have we have a compilation that have hold with the international manual. I think like that. Thank you very much.
Yes, so I understand your question better now. That is not something that certainly that the IMF does. We don't certify any country. That's just not something that they choose to do. Our mandate is really more to provide assistance wherever we can to help improve the data. And so there is, particularly in terms of something like national accounts, there's no like point where you've reached certification and you get the stamp of approval. It's a constant process of maintaining, you know, in a changing world where the methodologies and the guidance changes as well over time. But I do know, I think that we are looking to have some engagement. Some of my colleagues who work on national accounts would like to engage on assisting with national accounts, but I can't really speak to that because it's not my expertise. So when I was talking about quality, I was really talking about the PPI as the aspect that I'm more deeply involved with.
Is it enough? 3? We already have Pak Nurul Hasanuddin as our Director of Price Statistics. Maybe do you have any comment?
Aku, Mbak.
Sebentar Bu Indri, ini ada Pak Hasan dulu.
Okay, thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, you're welcome, Pak.
Mr. Andrew, good evening. I heard your explain how to disseminate PPI ideally every month yesterday. We have the obstacles which has to be suggested by Mr. Andrew about disseminate to every month. We still disseminate PPI quarterly because constraints face related to monthly data collection. Although in 2019, we will try to plan to be able to disseminate it every month because of its considerable need for this PPI indicator, while we have released WPI monthly. For substitute about needs the stakeholder about PPI indicator, we release WPI. May I know from you, Mr. Andrew, how about WPI in the world for the calculate in the economies of the countries? Thank you, Mr. Andrew.
Thank you for the question. So the wholesale price index typically would be measuring the expenditures of domestic businesses or any non-households, so from the expenditure side. And generally, we encourage countries to kind of move from a WPI compilation, to the PPI, which you already have, right? You also have some PPI. The general advice of the price index community is that it's better because the PPI would more closely align with the production account of the national accounts, that would be a more suitable deflator than, for example, a wholesale price index. Although a wholesale price index might be very interesting for analytical purposes and for economic analysis. So, I don't think there's anything where we would say I think that is a valuable indicator in its own right. But for countries where they produce a WPI but not a PPI, we've generally given the advice that they should make sure that they get a PPI produced. I think from what I've been told from the national accounts experts is that the deflators would better align with the national accounts if we could have a producer price index to represent domestic production, and then a separate import and export price index to reflect the trade accounts, the cross-border trade. We don't tend to do too much work with the import-export price indexes. I know they have a lot of challenges. They're traditionally mostly composed of data from customs authorities from the border. Do you compile any import-export price indexes?
Yes, I compile the export-import index, ITPI, International Trade Price Index, but the sample respondent is still use WPI respondent, and in this year we try to compile the double ITPI for producer respondent. I hope in next year we can combine the respondent from WPI and the respondent from PPI for export-import.
Right. So maybe the WPI respondents would align well with the for the import price index, right? Because it's measuring the expenditures of the domestic companies. Whereas, you might have some overlap with PPIs, but PPIs is looking at, from the other side of the transaction, the producers rather than the purchaser. I've seen in some countries, what they will do is try to identify the producers that are exporters and then almost share the sample with like a subsample of the exporters. And those prices could also go in the PPI since it represents part of their production. And so almost like that the export side would be a subsample of the PPI, while the import side would be more aligned with the WPI. And I've seen countries try to make different aggregations using those groupings. And I think that's really very useful when those measures can be created. But again, it's not unusual to produce PPIs quarterly. To personally, if your data users are okay with this, I think they're still
challenge.
very. I'm sorry.
This is our challenge to change to monthly PPI.
Yeah. So anything that we could find efficiencies in the operation would help you, make the data get released faster. The other thing I said that you might want to consider is a revision period if you move to monthly, because you will be faced with some non-response challenges when you have to quickly get out a monthly indicator. And it might be good practice to still maybe revise back to the quarter, so the prior 2 months of the quarter also being subject to revision. But I know it is definitely involves costs to move from quarterly to monthly. The burden on the staff, the burden on the systems, the burden on the data collection. So it's really a matter of weighing the priorities, right? Versus other improvements you might make. Timeliness is a very important aspect of quality, but it's just one aspect of quality. And it has to be weighed, timeliness against accuracy, against relevance, which expanding to services helps improve relevance of the measure as well. So I think statistical agencies all over the world are dealing with these competing priorities. And I would say many systems have weighed those priorities and said, we'll try to improve the quality of the data while still releasing it quarterly. It really comes down to your users and what's most important for them.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Andrew. About from Central Java, Mbak Indri tadi.
Yes, please, Bu Indri, do you have any comment or question?
Okay, thank you. But I'm not asking about the material or exercise. Sir Andrew, if enough time, we have made a video as a thank you gift for you. This is video from the.
Bu Indri, sorry, can you speak louder?
Oh, belum ya? Udah? Tes.
Ya udah.
Okay.
Ya udah. Tadi
Okay.
kecil, Bu.
Okay. I'm not asking about the material or exercise, but Sir Andrew, if enough time, we have made a video as a thank you gift for us, the participant or province in Indonesia. We are very glad for joining this course. As you know, this is our first time virtual meeting. Okay, this experience make us to push how to improve our English conversation, Okay, and we are very glad for joining this course. Thank you. Thank you for the knowledge that you have been shared for us. You are the best teacher ever. Okay. I'm very amazing. I can joining this exercise. Okay, and may you always be blessed by God because of your sincerity in guiding us. Thank you, Sir Andrew, and salam sehat. Apa sih kalau bahasa Inggris? In English, healthy.
Stay healthy.
May healthy with you and your family too. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really touching. I really appreciate that. And I hope all of you in all the parts of Indonesia, I know we have people from all over the country here on this call. I hope all of you stay healthy and your families stay healthy and you have a very blessed year. I just want to share that same thought. This has been a fantastic experience for me. I really mean it when I say I appreciate just the excellent questions you've had throughout this week. And you're really just a wonderful group to work with. I can see why you're able to produce these great statistics because I could tell from your questions and the attention you've paid even with this difficulty of remote video. I just am very grateful for your participation in the course and for your attention. And as I said, I'm very happy to help in whatever way I can in the future. Anyone who, WhatsApp, email, I will be absolutely happy to hear from my friends in Indonesia and provide assistance in any way I can.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Maybe our next agenda. We have a video for you, but I don't know who will share the video. Chepi?
Yeah. Okay, this is Debbie.
That was great. Thank you so much. You're all famous. You're all video stars.
So there is a video for you. It was compiled by Central Java DPS, Bu Indri, who is the leader.
Thanks to Mas Farid, Mbak Debbie, because he made it for us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, sir.
And hopefully someday I will be in Central Java, so I can see.
Borobudur Temple.
Mm.
So maybe is there any comment? Or if no, maybe we have a break for a while before we have a closing remark for today.
Sure. Were we going to have the closing remarks at 11?
No, at 10:30.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe we will have a break first, and we will join again at 10:30. But don't leave this meeting.
No.
Okay.
We'll see you at 10:30.
Okay. See you.
Wes Lurit, wes tak ucapkan terima kasih Lurit.
Kok nggak ada suaranya ya?
Mas Cepi.
Tim Pustikat ada yang bisa bantu biar Pak Deputi bisa masuk ke dalam, bisa join.
Sudah masuk.
Sudah masuk ya, Pak? Alhamdulillah.
Iya.
Mau
Assalamualaikum
videonya, Mas Cepi.
teman kalian, sudah bisa diterima ya?
Salam, Pak.
Oke, Pak. Terima kasih.
Mohon maaf ya.
Oh, iya nih. Udah muncul sih. Tapi nggak apa-apa deh. Iya, iya, iya. Di sini aja, Pak. Nggak usah jauh-jauh. Oke, oke. Saya sudah pakai masker. Di tempatnya saya, Bapak.
Martina.
Oke.
Ada Cepi.
Ada.
Tolong saya jadiin co-host.
Jadiin co-host.
Selamat pagi Mbak Ria.
Selamat siang Pak Deputi.
Selamat pagi Pak Stianto.
Ada.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang saya hormati Pak Deputi, Pak Setianto, Pak Nurul, Pak Sentot, Bu Eni ya sudah ada. Sebelum kita mulai nanti MC-nya Mbak Martina sedang siap-siap. Mudah-mudahan acara ini dapat berjalan dengan lancar. Terima kasih kepada bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu yang sudah hadir di acara penutupan ini. Mungkin sambil menunggu beberapa saat lagi kita akan mulai. Kalau Mbak Martina sudah siap, kita mulai. Sudah siap Mbak ya? Oh iya, kita mulai aja. Kepada Mbak Martina kami persilahkan. Silakan Mbak.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the closing ceremony will start soon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Mr. Andrew from International Monetary Fund. Good evening in Washington, Mr. The Honorable Deputy Director General of Distribution and Services Statistics of BPS Statistics Indonesia, Mr. Setianto. The Honorable Director of Price Statistics of BPS Statistics Indonesia, Mr. Nurul Hasanuddin. The Honorable Chief Education and Training Center of BPS Statistics Indonesia, Mrs. Anil Sterningsi. The Honorable Head of BPS of Central Java, Mr. Sentot Bangun. The Honorable Head of Subdirectorate of Producer Price Statistics of BPS Statistics Indonesia, Mrs. Riyandayani. The Honorable Structural and Functional of Education and Training Center of BPS Statistics Indonesia, Widai Suara and Facilitator, Organizing Committee, invited guests, and all participants. First of all, let us say thanks to Allah so we can attend in this special event, the closing ceremony of Technical Assistant International Monetary Fund online training on developing services producer price index by online learning method. On this closing ceremony, we have several agenda. The first is opening, the second prayer station, the third briefly report on the implementation of training from Chief of Education and Training Center of BPS Statistics, the fourth greeting and comment from three participants about this training, the fifth closing remark from Mr. Andrew, the sixth closing remark and official closing by Deputy Director General of Distribution and Services Statistics of BPS Statistics Indonesia, and the last is closing. Before starting the whole series of closing ceremony, let us start with the prayer citation which will be recited by Mr. Kadafi Suyatno. To Mr. Kadafi Suyatno, time is yours. I'm sorry.
Kenapa ada trouble jaringan?
To Mr. Kadevi Suyatno.
Suaranya bilang nggak ada.
We're sorry because I think something trouble.
Martina, silakan dimulai.
Assalamualaikum. Mohon maaf Ibu. Tadi sebenarnya sudah dimulai, apa kita mulai lagi dari awal ya?
Iya.
Tadi suara Devi mohon maaf belum terdengar. Jadi apa kita mulai lagi dari awal? Mohon maaf Ibu dan Bapak semuanya.
Langsung aja kan tadi udah baca itu. Tinggal baca apa tadi? Doa ya. Karena waktu nih takutnya Pak Deputi nanti ada agenda lagi.
Test. Hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Hello.
We start.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry about my computer mic was crashed, and I just restart my computer.
Ya, Devi. Oke.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Let us begin our activity with bow our heart together, beg for mercy, while hoping that our dua will be granted by Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. I will lead this prayer based on teaching of Islam, and those who are not Muslim, you are pleased to pray according to each other religion and belief. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Hamdan na'imin, hamdan syakirin, hamdan yuafi ni'ama yukafi mazida. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wa azika azimi sultanik. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Allah, our Lord, with your grace we are thankful. In your protection we gather, and because of your blessing, this activity can be carried out well. Please make this activity useful activity and a record of our religion deeds to you. O Allah, the all-knowing God, turn the knowledge we gain during this technical assistance into useful knowledge. Give us strength, patience, convenience, sincerity, and intelligence, so that we are able to practice the knowledge that you have bestowed upon us into the path that you are pleased with. O Allah, on the most merciful, forgive our mistakes and sins, the sins of our family, the sins of our leaders, and the sins of those who have contributed to us, including the sins of those who have played a role in carrying out this activity well. Give us health and protect us to fulfill our duty, so that we can practice the knowledge we have gained during this training activity. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Kadafi was recited the prayer. May Allah always bless us. Amin. Now we come to the next section, briefly report on the implementation of training that will be delivered by the Chief of Education and Training Center of PPI Statistics Indonesia. So Mrs. Anil Stadiningsi, time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Honorable Bapak Setian, Deputy Chief Statistician for Distribution and Services Statistics, BPS Statistics Indonesia. The Honorable Mr. Andrew Baer, Senior Economist of the IMF. The Honorable Bapak Nurul Hasanuddin, Director of Price Statistics, BPS Statistics Indonesia. And very distinguished, very special guest. This time there is Bapak Yos, Head of BPS Province of Sulawesi Selatan, and also our distinguished very special guest, Bapak Sentot, Head of BPS Province of Jawa Tengah, and also distinguished officer from Education and Training Center, all structural, media Iswara, and all staff, and all beloved participants of the training. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good evening for Mr. Andrew Baer, and good morning for ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me to convey briefly report related to the closing session of the IMF Technical Assistant on the online training of Producer Price Index for Services. In this nice occasion, I would like to inform some important points related to the closing session of the training as following. This online training of PPI for services has been conducted well. It was delivered on 6 to 10 July by using the method of distance learning virtually class on the Warkop Learning Management System facilitated by Education and Training Center of BPS Statistics Indonesia. Total learning hours, it is called JP in Bahasa Indonesia, is about 28 JP, and most of the training hours are synchronous method, which are divided into 2 sessions. First session is about synchronous learning session with Mr. Andrew Baer as the lecturer from the IMF, spending 3 hours each day from 8 to 11 a.m. Jakarta time or 8 until 11 p.m. at Washington time. Even sometimes it was also almost until midnight time also. Second, internal session with duration of 1.5 hours for 4 days from 13 to 14:30 p.m. There was about discussion session and also knowledge sharing from the Director of Price Statistics and Chief of Education and Training Center. In addition to the synchronous method, there were also asynchronous methods, such as self-learning to the SPPI handouts, session of doing exercise by downloading from the Warkop menu, conduct pre-test, and also post-test. The handout material here presented in this training includes some following subjects, such as SPPI overview, choosing activities to cover, wage and sampling for SPPI, type of price for SPPI, data collection for SPPI, telecommunication SPPI, index calculation, quality adjustment, dissemination practices for SPPI, linking price data series. While for the exercise, applied only for the 2 subjects, index calculation and linking data series. As we inform, the knowledge sharing from Echelon 2 was consist of overview SPPI in Indonesia by Pak Nurul Hasanuddin, Director of Price Statistics, and also about competency development from me, Chief of Education Training Center. In order to evaluate final performance of all participants, we apply scoring method based on 2 criteria as following. First, score from the result of the exercise work. This is about 40% for the wage. Second, score from the behavior. This is assessed based on attendance and activeness during the discussion. This is about 60% for the weight. The performance score of participant is only applied to 51 participants among 65 participants, excluding participants from the producer price statistics subdirectorate. Therefore, we present here the final score from 51 participants as following. Average of exercise 85.20. Average of behavior 91.91. Average of total score 89.23. Range of the score from 76 up to 93.50. And finally, we would like to inform here the best 3 participants as following. Who are they? Okay, let me inform. The third place goes to Ibu Isdriarti from BPS Province of Jawa Tengah. Tepuk tangan. Okay. And then second place goes to Leonardo A. Simamora from Subdirectorate of Rural Price Statistics. And the first place, who is he? Goes to Lin Purwati, BPS Province of Sulawesi Selatan. As organizer, we try to provide best services for all participants. We realize our workshops online learning facilities still need continuous improvement to be excellent service to all users. Therefore, we are very welcome to all suggestions and inputs from all users, including from Pak Andrew. To Mr. Andrew, Pak Andrew, again, we really would like to convey our sincere thank you for your great lecture and kind support for this online training of SPPI. We do expect this nice mutual collaboration between BPS Statistik Indonesia and the IMF would be continued in the future. In closing of my reports, generally, we could say, Alhamdulillah, that the training was going on very well. Thank you to the organizer from the ETC and from the subject matter for their coordination and hard working during this training. Finally, we would like to ask for our Deputy Chief Statistician for Distribution and Services Statistics, Bapak Setianto, to deliver his closing speech and also officially closing the online training of Producer Price Index for services. Thank you for your attention. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you to Mrs. Annie Lesmaninsi. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing remark, now we would like to invite 3 participants to convey briefing and comments on behalf of participants about the training that has been held for 5 days. Each participant can deliver their comment. We start from Mrs. Isdriarti from BPS of Central Java Province, and then directly continued by Mr. Nyoto Wionodin Yuliantoro from Directorate of Price Statistics, and then continued by Mr. Muhtar Abdul Khalik from BPS of Papua Province. To Mrs. Isdriarti, time is yours.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'm very surprised. I don't expect this appreciation, but you all know that my English is not good. But during this lesson, I'm focused. I hope I can improve myself in the future. But I'm sorry because during the lesson, I always use masker because in my town, Semarang, there's many COVID-19. So I'm speechless, but I don't expect this appreciation. But thank you for all of you, and thank you for Sir Andrew, and nice to meet you, and hope we meet again in the future in another lesson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Indri. Next.
Okay, the next to Mr. Nyoto Wiono Didin Yulian Choro. We please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andre. Thank you for great learning for me, for our directorate, our direct NPPS. Thank you. Thank you for attention and thank you.
Thank you, Masidin. Next, who else?
And the next, Mr. Muhtar Abdul Khalik from BPS of Papua Province. To Mr. Muhtar, time is yours. Okay, maybe Mr. Muhtar, there is something trouble. We change to the next comment from Mrs. Lin.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Does my voice sounds clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, thank you for the opportunity to talk. For the first time, I should say thanks to Chief Statistician of South Sulawesi Province, Mr. Yos Rusdiansyah, for the opportunity to join this course. Actually, this is my first time to know about producer price index because actually I'm the staff of agriculture statistics in Makassar. But as I said, as a statistician, I think we have to encourage ourselves to improve our ability to improve our competency, at least to improve our knowledge, right? So I think it's the one of the way to get that to get there. Okay, and I think thank you very much to Mr. Andrew for this enjoyable course because the material is really really great to study. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for all the comments. And next, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the next section, closing remark from Mr. Andrew. To Mr. Andrew, time is yours.
Well, thank you very much to all who made this such a successful course and a fantastic experience. For me to be able to meet all of you many kilometers away from Washington. It's been wonderful to meet people from all of the different regional offices who participated in this course. I want to really thank Bueni. Debbie was an excellent host for us for much of the 5 days. Mr. Chepi, who helped with coordination. Bu Martina, thank you for hosting this closing session. And really thank you to all of the participants in the course. This has been a fantastic experience for me. And I hope for those of you who are fairly new to learning about Producer Price Index, that you will continue your learning process and that we can continue to collaborate in the future on continuing to expand the coverage of producer price indexes in Indonesia. And again, to recognize that you already do an outstanding job in producing high quality data that covers many services activities. So I want to recognize the exceptional work that you are doing and to thank you for your great attention and wonderful participation. Really excellent questions that we had all week. And just to reiterate how impressed I am with the organization to put together this large class with all these participants during this difficult time that we are all distanced from one another. So thank you very much for inviting us. And I hope that we get to work together again in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrew. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda is closing remark and official closing of Technical Assistant International Monetary Fund online training on developing services producer price index by Deputy Director General of Distribution and Services Statistics of BPI Statistik Indonesia. To Mr. Setianto, me please.
Distinguished Mr. Andrew Baird and allow me to introduce myself. My name is Setianto. Maybe it's my first time to meet you, Mr. Andrew, even with a long distance from the Washington, D.C. and Jakarta. But with this technology, we can meet, we can speak and discuss about the PPI. And also my fellow colleagues from the BPS Statistik Indonesia, head of
Bapak speakernya mohon di unmute Bapak speakernya.
Also Nurul Hasanuddin, Director of the Price Statistic, and all of the participants of this online training, both from the BPS headquarters and also from the provincial offices. First, I would like to thank to Almighty God for the blessing us with health and the opportunity so that we can arrive at the end of this technical. Congratulate to all of the participants for completing this 5 days online training. As you know that this training assistant of PPI for services aims to improve the capacity of the BPS human resources in terms of knowledge of the usage of scope, methodology, and the data collection, and also the calculation of the PPI for services. We know that the ideally that we rather conduct this training face to face, so that we can have we must do it online. However, personally, it's like a blessing in disguise. It's better that we to continue the training online because we can when this training not only area directorate of
Koneksinya hilang ya?
Iya, sepertinya ini
Ya.
keluar.
Kayaknya lagi ditelepon Pak Hasan. Mungkin koneksinya di ruangan Pak Deputi kurang bagus mungkin. Tunggu dulu sebentar. I'm sorry, Andrew. We still wait for our deputy. Maybe our deputy lost connection because good the internet. Maybe we still wait for Bapak deputy. Pak Hasan, bagaimana Pak? Masih nunggu nggak ya? Gimana Pak?
Ya, sebentar lagi diusahakan.
Ya, baik.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear?
Iya Bapak, bisa didengar tapi agak putus Bapak.
Can you hear my voice?
Nah, lebih jelas sekarang Pak.
Okay, thank you. I continue. Ladies and gentlemen, the need of our stakeholder for PPI data are growing right now. In line with the growing services in our economy, and also the government middle-term development plan, call it as a 2004, which aim more service development, and also BPST for the better quality, statistic quality. We produce such as national account that require PI data used for the and more data for services category. The statistic it's better for us to focus more on improving the quality of data, especially that we can data services sector. During this technical assistant, not only you learn many theories about the PPI, including weight, sampling, theory, type of price, data collection, telecommunication, and index calculation, etc. But your knowledge on SPPI has been assessed by completing pre and post tests. You also have preliminary recommendation and discussion on the topic, which I can imagine were very exciting. I'm heard from the Bu Eni. There is three Bu Lis, Triati, Pak Leonardo, Bu Lin Purwati. Congratulations for your achievement. And also, ladies and gentlemen, with all of these activities, I hope that from now, each of every participant can start to look for the best way to solve all of the problems and obstacles that we might face in the future during the development of the services sector, both in the field and in the aspect related sample framework, methodology, and the quality, data quality, especially to the participant from the provincial office. I hope after this training, you can all start the calculation PPI for services at the provincial level. You should also share the knowledge that you have gained during this training with your colleague there, including the field enumerators, so that they can conduct the interview and probe the information from the respondent and in line with the concept and definition with which has been established. Before I conclude my speech on this very special occasion on behalf of BPS Statistik Indonesia, I would like to extend my highest gratitude to Pak Andrew. Thank you for sharing your valuable knowledge with us and leading the discussion so that we have a better understanding about the PPI for services. And in the future, if you have any comments or further input for us and how we produce our PPI data, please feel free to let us know. And also thank you for Bu Eni and the BPS Education and Training Center who have provided the facilities so that we can carry out the online training successfully. I hope in this future we can use this kind of media and method to keep increasing the capacity of BPS human resources. And finally, I'm happy to announce that the online training on PPI for services is officially closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Setianto that has officially closing this event. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your coming and your nice attention. That's all our closing ceremony today. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mbak Martina,
Assalamualaikum.
could we allow Pak Yos?
Agak
nggak bagus ya.
kurang bagus.
Mr. Anu, Pak Yos, Pak Sentot, please. Bapak mau izin Bapak.
Halo, suaranya nggak jelas.
Jelas Bapak, Pak Sentot, monggo. Pak Sentot, setelah itu Pak Yos, please. Mr. Andrew, excuse me. We would like to have short remarks from Pak Sentot, Head of Province Jawa Tengah, and also from Pak Yos, Head of Province Sulawesi Selatan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bu Eni. The Honorable Pak Setianto, Deputy Statistic Distribution and Services, and Pak Andrew from the IMF, Bu Eni, Kapus Diklat, PPS. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this Zoom meeting in the closing ceremony. First, I would like to thank also because of this training. I hope that in Central Java we will have better statistical in producer price index, because we really need that in order to have the good picture in the regional account. We need producer price index that we can estimate the current as well as the constant price index. So if we have the producer price index better, I think the estimation of the GDRP in the regional office will have the very good result. Thank you for this training. I hope that IMF will support another training that needed by the NSO in the sub-national level. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Sentot. And then please, Pak Yos.
Thank you, Bu Eni. The Honorable Mr. Setianto, Deputy of BPS, the Honorable Mr. Andrew from IMF, Ibu Eni, Kapus Diklat, serta all participants. In the name of BPS of South Sulawesi, I am very grateful that one of our subordinate had attended and achieved the best participant. Congrats, Bulin. I'm sure that his knowledge will increase her insights, follow with the creativity, doing some aggressive changing in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Yos. Yes. Okay. Pak Hasan, could you have something to say? Hasan is still here.
Thank you, Bu Eni. Mr. Andrew, I'm sure, I believe we are able to improve the quality of the process. Yes, we can. So that the vision for quality data results can be achieved from in producing quality data as output. We need improve to all input and processes, and this training is for improve the input and process, so we can result the output better than before. I believe, and yes, we can for improve the PPI for the next years, maybe better and better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mbak Martina, is there another photo session again with Pak Yos, Pak Sentot, Pak Hasan? Maybe, please arrange it.
Okay, before we close this session, maybe we can take a position. Ladies and gentlemen, we are requested to take a position ready to face the cameras respectively. Maybe I want to count. 1, 2, 3. And don't forget to smile. Okay, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Is enough. Once more, ladies and gentlemen. Smile. Okay, it's enough.
Okay. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu. Thank you again for Pak Andrew. Terima kasih Pak Andrew. Now you learn about terima kasih. Terima kasih is thank you. Terima kasih Pak Yos, Bapak Deputi, terima kasih Bapak Nurul Hasanuddin, Pak Senton, dan Bapak Ibu semuanya, dan seluruh peserta. Terima kasih sekali lagi. Alhamdulillah, training sudah selesai. Ini kalau mau kangen-kangenan silakan diteruskan dulu. Bagi bapak-bapak yang mau sholat Jumat, monggo Pak bisa dipersilakan live, Pak Hasan, Pak Sentot, Bapak Ibu yang lain. Mungkin Andrew masih ini sudah hampir malam. Andrew, in your time now already almost midnight, yeah.
It's a little bit after midnight. It's but it's okay. It's easy to stay up late when there's excellent students and interesting conversation. So it's been a great pleasure for me.
Yeah. It seems the time is very short, ya, Pak Andrew. Okay. Ya, teman-teman, ada yang mumpung masih ada Pak Andrew nih, siapa tahu yang mau belum ada kesempatan tadi. Ini kan sudah informally session.
Saya
mungkin siapa nih, Mbak Indri, monggo Mbak.
Ya, saya belum mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Bapak Sentot. Terima kasih atas supporting dan kepercayaannya kepada saya dengan bahasa Inggris yang terpatah-patah. Terima kasih Pak Sentot. Mudah-mudahan masih ada di pertemuan. Thank you for Mr. Sentot for supporting and trusting me join this lesson. Thank you very much.
Oke, Mbak Sami-Sami. Oke, maybe from other participant, another 5 minutes and then we close all ya. Barangkali masih ada yang mau ini say something to Pak Andrew, mumpung Pak Andrew still here. Siapa? Ada? Pak Sugi, mungkin Pak Sugi mau say something to Pak Andrew?
Yeah, Pak Sugi. Say something, Pak Sugi, to Mr. Andrew.
Okay.
Or we will meet in Sydney.
Okay, thank you, Bu Eni. Mr. Andrew, thank you very much for your knowledge sharing to all participants in BBS. I think it's very important knowledge for implemented to how calculate the producer price index in particular services. Even not easy, but have the challenging more to implement it, not only in central BBS, but only from regional province. I think it's one important to support the not only from the national account, but also in regional, national. It's important for Indonesia. Thank you for your sharing. I think maybe we'll meet you next in Indonesia to training again. Thank you very much.
I hope that is true, that I get to meet you in Indonesia someday. Thank you very much.
Yes, Pak Andrew, please come to Jakarta. And then the last one is from Ibu Sri Andayani, Pak Andrew. This is the head of Producer Price Statistics Subdirectorate. Please, Ibu Sri.
Thank you, Bu Eni. Pak Andrew, I would like to say thank you for your patience because we are facing our language quite hard to speak in English. So thank you again for giving us a wonderful knowledge so we can continue to produce a good quality of this SPPI. As the follow-up of this technical assistancy, we hope that our colleagues from regional offices can start to exercise with our real data from previous year to start estimate the SPPI based on the data, and then we can monitor the progress in the next month to have more discussion about the learning with the real data based on this knowledge. Once again, thank you very much, Pak Andrew, for this training. I hope that we can meet in Jakarta after this pandemic of COVID-19 is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bu Sri. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah. Yes. I think same all participants really expect Pak Andrew come to Jakarta, even to Semarang, like Bu Indri say. Yeah, Pak Andrew, please. We hope pandemic COVID will be ended soon, so we can travel. You can visit Indonesia. You can visit Jakarta, Jogja, or in Semarang. Whatever you like, we will accompany you to come to visit. I mean, to visit other places in Indonesia. Thank you. Again, thank you very much. Mbak Nurma, udah ya, ditutup ya. Tadi udah ditutup sebenarnya. Okay, thank you everyone. Once again, thank you everyone. And
thank you,
Pak Andrew, if you have the comment or suggestion for our workshop, the cafeteria of knowledge, you are very welcome to give suggestion or input for us. Yeah. I will wait for your comment about our LMS learning system.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. I hope to see you all soon.
Yes. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you Bu Eni.
Ya, Ibu Ria, terima kasih.
Thank you Bu Sri.
Thank you juga. Buat teman-teman daerah jangan keluar dulu ya.
Terima
Ada
kasih Bu
beberapa
Eni.
pengumuman yang ingin disampaikan.
Siap.
Saya mau keluar ya.
Iya, Tina keluar.
Iya. Debbie, saya langsung aja ya.
Iya Bu, silakan Bu.
Iya, jadi gini teman-teman.
Boleh dengerin boleh aja Bu.
Boleh silahkan. Terbuka kok. Karena intinya saya ingin follow up dari kegiatan ini. Teman-teman akan kami berikan raw data dari hasil pengumpulan survei harga produsen sektor jasa tahun 2019. Dan sebagai base year kita akan berikan juga yang tahun 2010. Dan kita berharap juga berdasarkan penjelasan dari Andrew, bagaimana cara kita shifting ke tahun yang baru. Dalam hal ini kita akan berikan kuartal terakhir 2018 dan mungkin Desember 2018. Jadi nanti itu menjadi dasar dari exercise teman-teman. Sebagai exercise kami akan berikan sektor perhotelan dan rumah makan dulu untuk sementara. Nanti hasilnya silakan dicoba dulu. Bulan berikutnya kita akan adakan Zoom meeting sebagai monitoring dari progress exercise-nya. Kendala apa yang teman-teman alami di dalam melakukan exercise, silakan disampaikan pada saat diskusi di bulan berikutnya. Kalau teman-teman bersedia, kami akan siapkan raw datanya dan kami setting pertemuan berikutnya sesuai dengan kesediaan teman-teman. Mungkin minggu kedua di bulan Agustus atau minggu pertama di bulan Agustus. Kapan waktunya nanti kita buat. Silakan masukan dari teman-teman atas follow up dari training ini bagaimana? Mudah-mudahan bersedia semuanya. Hopefully.
Siap, insya Allah.
Insya Allah ya Mbak Indri.
Bisa Bu.
Bisa, alhamdulillah. Gimana?
Setuju Bu, sekalian
Setuju. Alhamdulillah.
Ya,
Jadi nanti seperti biasa PIC dari masing-masing provinsi di statistik harga produsen akan standby. Kalau ada kendala silakan menghubungi PIC-nya. Nanti kalau PIC-nya nggak mampu atau belum bisa memutuskan atas permasalahan, nanti bisa naik ke atas koordinator, dalam hal ini adalah Pak Fendi atau Mas Fendi. Ya, jadi kalau semuanya setuju, saya ucapkan terima kasih atas kerjasama dan partisipasi teman-teman semua atas kegiatan technical asistensi sehingga bisa berlangsung dengan lancar. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Silakan Mbak Debbie, saya kembalikan Mas Sevi.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ya, mungkin sudah siang juga. Mungkin kita akhiri saja ya, Bapak Ibu.
Pantun dong.
Ya Allah, ada pantun dari Pak Budi. Kita dengerin dulu deh sebentar, boleh?
Wah, Pak Budi pantun.
Sebelum berakhir ya, teman-teman, maaf. Pak Budi mana pantunnya? Makan roti jangan berlari.
Cakep.
Bersihkan hati, sucikan diri.
Mantap.
Di kemudian hari.
60.
Nyanyi.
Kas ya?
Sama Pak Didin barengan. Joget. Puisi.
Lihat ini kan?
Pak Didin bahasa pantomim, Pak Didin pantomim.
Thank you, Mas.
Pantomin tuh kata Pak Sugi, pantomin. Tawanya kenceng banget Pak Din.
Siap, Pak Sugi.
Dadah Esther.
Dadah. Sampai
semuanya.
ketemu lagi. Dadah semua.
Terima kasih ya.
Terima kasih ya semuanya. Sampai ketemu lagi. Amin.
Sampai ketemu lagi.
Mohon maaf kalau selama jadi moderator kurang baik.
Ya, saya maafkan, saya maafkan.
Saya maafkan.
Mas tingkati.
Sampai ketemu lagi ya.
Dengan
Sehat selalu, happy selalu.
Sampai ketemu di Malang ya.
Kalau nggak jadi bubar.
Virtual.
Malang ya, Bu.
Semarang aja Bu Indri, Semarang.
Siap. Ya, mau kemana?
di Malang.
Oke, izin lift ya.
Sampai jumpa di Washington.
Temuin
Sir Andrew.
Amin.
Itu kan nggak jangan milih banyak.
Ya, deket tuh Washington.
Iya.
Orang Lenteng Agung aja deket LA.
Salam buat kami ya.
Sebelum ke Washington ke LA dulu transit.
Iya. LA ke San Francisco. Terus ke Hollywood deh.
Oke,
Bye.
semuanya ya.
Oke, dadah. Yuk, selamat siang semuanya ya.
Kita mau ke Washington dulu ya.
Oke.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.